The dust cloud rose behind the stagecoach like a phantom chasing ghosts, and Rebecca Owens watched it disappear over the ridge with her heart sinking into her worn boots, knowing she had exactly 47 cents in her pocket and nowhere to go in this God-forsaken stretch of California territory. It was 1878, and Grass Valley had seemed like salvation when she'd left Sacramento 3 weeks ago, following a promise of work at a boarding house that turned out to be nothing more than a cruel rumor. The stage driver had been patient enough when she'd climbed aboard that morning, but patience only stretched so far when a woman couldn't produce the $3 fare. He'd put her off at this lonely crossroads, 15 miles outside of town, tipping his hat with something resembling pity, before cracking the whip and leaving her in a billowing curtain of California dust. The sun hammered down on the packed earth road, turning the world into wavering lines of heat. Rebecca shaded her eyes and looked in both directions, seeing nothing but scrub brush and the occasional twisted oak. Her carpetbag sat at her feet, containing everything she owned in this world, which wasn't much. A few dresses, a photograph of her parents who died of cholera 2 years back, and a leather-bound book of poetry that had been her mother's. She was 22 years old and entirely alone. The sound of hoofbeats made her turn. A rider was approaching from the west, sitting tall in the saddle on a paint horse that moved with easy confidence. As he drew closer, Rebecca could make out a broad-shouldered figure in a dusty brown hat, leather vest over a faded blue shirt, and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years under the California sun. He slowed as he approached, the horse dancing sideways as if sensing its rider's curiosity. "Afternoon, miss," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep and rough like gravel in a riverbed. "You having some trouble?" Rebecca straightened her spine, trying to maintain dignity even though she knew she must look desperate standing there with her bag in the middle of nowhere. "The stage left without me. I'm trying to get to Grass Valley." The cowboy's eyes, she noticed, were an unusual shade of gray-green like sagebrush after rain. He looked to be in his late 20s, with dark hair curling over his collar and a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in a few days. "Left without you or put you off?" There was no judgment in his tone, just simple curiosity. Rebecca felt her cheeks flush anyway. "I couldn't pay the fare. I thought I had enough, but the price had gone up since I'd last checked." He nodded slowly, looking down the empty road where the stage had vanished. "That's a long walk to town, 15 miles at least, and the sun isn't getting any cooler." He seemed to consider something for a moment, then swung down from his horse with fluid grace. "Name's Quinn Owens." "Most folks call me Quinn." "Rebecca Owens," she said automatically, then blinked. "Owens, that's my name too." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming it from merely handsome to something that made her heart skip. "Well, Cousin Rebecca, looks like family ought to help each other out." "Can you ride?" "We're not really cousins," she said, but she was smiling too, relieved beyond measure at this stroke of fortune. "No, but it's a remarkable coincidence all the same." He picked up her carpetbag and secured it behind his saddle with practiced efficiency. "I can take you into Grass Valley. I'm heading that way myself, need to pick up supplies before heading back to my ranch." Rebecca hesitated, knowing it wasn't proper to ride with a strange man, but propriety seemed less important than survival at the moment. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Owens." "Quinn," he corrected, then held out his hand to help her up. "You'll have to ride behind me. Hope you don't mind holding on." She took his hand, feeling calluses and strength, and let him help her swing up behind the saddle. The paint horse shifted but didn't protest the extra weight. Rebecca had no choice but to wrap her arms around Quinn's waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt. She could smell leather and sage and honest sweat, not unpleasant in the least. "Ready?" he asked over his shoulder. "Ready," she confirmed, and they started west at an easy lope. For the first few minutes, Rebecca focused on maintaining her balance and trying not to think about how close she was pressed against this stranger. But as they rode, she found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's gait. The landscape rolled by in shades of gold and green, the foothills of the Sierra Nevada rising in the distance like a promise of something better. "What brings you to Grass Valley?" Quinn asked after a while, his voice carrying easily over the steady drumbeat of hooves. "I was told there was work at a boarding house. When I got there, the owner said she'd never posted any such notice. I think someone played a cruel joke, or there was some misunderstanding." Rebecca tried to keep the bitterness from her voice. "I've been looking for work ever since, but I ran through my money faster than I expected. Everything is so expensive." "It is that," Quinn agreed. "Gold rush might be mostly over, but prices haven't come down much. What kind of work are you looking for? Anything respectable?" "I can cook, clean, so keep books. I worked in my father's mercantile before he died." Quinn was quiet for a moment. "My ranch could use help. It's not much, just me and my foreman Hector working a few hundred head of cattle and some horses. We've been making do with our own cooking, which is to say we've been eating beans and jerky and not much else. And the house is in need of a woman's touch, I'll be the first to admit." Rebecca's heart leaped, but she forced herself to be cautious. "What exactly would my duties be?" "Cooking, keeping the house clean, maybe helping with the books like you mentioned. I'm better with cattle than numbers." He glanced back at her, his expression serious. "It would be proper. There's a separate room off the kitchen that would be yours. And Hector lives in the bunkhouse, so you'd have chaperones of a sort. How much would the pay be?" $20 a month plus room and board. That's fair wage for this area." It was more than fair. Rebecca had been hoping to find something that paid 15. But she'd learned to be wary of offers that seemed too good. "Why would you offer a job to someone you just met on the road?" Quinn chuckled, a warm sound that seemed to come from deep in his chest. "Fair question. Truth is, I've been meaning to hire someone for months, but I haven't had time to go into town and do a proper search. You appearing like this seems like providence. But I understand if you're cautious. Tell you what, let's get you into Grass Valley and you can stay at the hotel tonight. Sleep on it. Ask around about me if you want. If you decide to take the job, I'll be back tomorrow morning to collect you." The fact that he understood her hesitation and gave her an out made Rebecca trust him more, not less. "That seems reasonable. Thank you." They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Rebecca found herself noticing details about Quinn. The way he sat his horse like he'd been born in the saddle, the gentle way he handled the reins, the breadth of his shoulders. She scolded herself for such thoughts. He was offering her employment, nothing more, and she needed to keep things professional if she was going to accept. But it was hard not to notice how her heartbeat quickened when he turned his head to point out a hawk circling overhead, or how safe she felt with her arms around him, even though they were strangers. "How long have you had your ranch?" she asked, wanting to know more about him. 5 years. Saved up money working cattle drives and bought the land cheap from a miner who struck out. It's good grazing land with a creek that runs year-round. I've built it up slowly, adding cattle and improving the herd. It's not fancy, but it's mine." There was pride in his voice, the kind that came from honest work. Rebecca respected that. Her father had been the same way about his mercantile, building it from nothing through long hours and fair dealing. "What happened to your parents?" she asked softly. "You mentioned they died." "Cholera outbreak in Sacramento 2 years back. It swept through so fast. 1 week they were fine, the next they were gone. I had a younger sister too, but she married a banker's son from San Francisco. We write occasionally, but we were never close. I'm sorry. It's a hard thing losing family. It is, Quinn agreed. That's when I decided to head for Grass Valley and start fresh. Sacramento had too many ghosts. Rebecca understood that completely. She'd felt the same way, needing to escape the memories that haunted every street corner. The landscape began to change as they drew closer to town. More oaks appeared, and the grass grew greener. They passed a few ranches with neat fences and grazing cattle. Children playing in a yard stopped to wave as they rode by, and Quinn waved back. Grass Valley itself came into view as they crested a rise. It was a decent-sized town, larger than Rebecca had expected, with a main street lined with wooden buildings, several churches with white steeples, and houses spreading out in all directions. The town had grown fat on gold money and was now settling into a more permanent prosperity based on timber and ranching. Quinn guided his horse down the main street, nodding to people who called out greetings. Clearly, he was known here. Rebecca noticed several women watching with undisguised curiosity, probably wondering who the stranger riding behind Quinn Owens might be. She tried not to feel self-conscious about it. He stopped in front of a two-story building with a painted sign reading Valley Hotel. The building looked well-maintained, with fresh paint and clean windows. Quinn dismounted and reached up to help Rebecca down. His hands were strong around her waist, lifting her easily, and for a moment they stood close together, her hands on his shoulders, his on her waist. "Here we are," he said, but he didn't immediately step back. Rebecca looked up at him, really seeing him for the first time now that they were face to face. He had small lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, and a thin scar running through his left eyebrow. His face was honest and open without guile. She felt something shift inside her, a warmth that had nothing to do with the California heat. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. You didn't have to help me." "Couldn't leave a lady stranded on the road," Quinn said. His eyes searched her face, and she wondered what he saw there. "Besides, I have a feeling it was meant to be, us meeting like that." "Don't you?" "Maybe," Rebecca admitted, not quite ready to acknowledge the pull she felt toward this man she'd known for less than an hour. Quinn reached into his vest pocket and pulled out some coins. "Here. This should cover a night at the hotel and a good meal." Rebecca stiffened. "I can't take your money. You've already done enough. Consider it an advance on your wages if you decide to take the job." He pressed the coins into her hand, closing her fingers around them. "A woman needs to eat and have a safe place to sleep. It's not charity, it's common decency." She wanted to argue, but pride wouldn't fill her stomach or pay for a bed. "I'll pay you back. If you take the job, we'll call it even. If you don't, you can mail it to Quinn Owens, Circle O Ranch, Grass Valley. Someone will get it to me." He retrieved her carpetbag from his horse and set it at her feet. "I'll be back tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. If you're here and willing, the job is yours. If not, I'll wish you well and be on my way. No hard feelings either way." Rebecca nodded, clutching the coins. 9 o'clock. I'll have an answer for you then." Quinn touched his hat brim one more time, that slow smile appearing again. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Miss Rebecca Owens. I hope to see you tomorrow." He swung back into the saddle with that easy grace, and Rebecca watched him ride down the street toward the general store. Several people stopped him to chat, and she could see he was well liked. That was a good sign. She picked up her bag and went into the hotel. The lobby was clean and smelled of beeswax and lavender. A middle-aged woman behind the desk looked up with a professional smile. "Help you, dear. I need a room for the night, please. That'll be 50 cents. Meals are extra. Supper is at 6 in the dining room." Rebecca counted out the coins and signed the register. The woman, whose name was Mrs. Patterson according to a small sign on the desk, handed her a key. "You're in room 7, top of the stairs and to the right. There's a washroom at the end of the hall, Mrs." Patterson peered at her with kind but curious eyes. "You're new to town. Come in on the stage." "Not exactly," Rebecca said. "I'm considering a job offer. I was wondering if you might know Quinn Owens from the Circle O Ranch." Mrs. Patterson's face lit up. "Know him? Of course I do. Fine young man. Lost his wife about 3 years back in childbirth, poor thing. He took it hard, but he's been slowly coming back to himself. Works that ranch like the devil, probably to keep from thinking too much." "Why do you ask?" Rebecca felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Quinn had been married. He'd lost his wife, and he hadn't mentioned it. Of course, why would he? They'd only just met, and it was clearly a painful subject. "He offered me a position as housekeeper at his ranch," Rebecca managed to say. "Did he now?" Mrs. Patterson looked pleased. "Well, that's wonderful. That man needs someone to look after him in that house. He's been living like a hermit out there. You'll be in good hands, dear. Quinn Owens is as honest as they come. Never met a more decent man." Rebecca felt some of her worry ease. "Thank you, that's good to know." She took her bag upstairs and found room 7 to be small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. Rebecca sat on the bed and counted her remaining money. With what Quinn had given her, minus the room cost, she had enough to eat for a few days if she was careful. But she couldn't afford to be picky. She needed work, and Quinn was offering a legitimate job with good pay. But more than that, something had stirred in her heart when she'd been riding behind him, her arms around his waist. Something she hadn't felt since before her parents died. She'd been numb for so long, just surviving day to day. Quinn Owens had made her feel alive again with nothing more than a smile and an act of kindness. She thought about his wife, the woman who had died bringing his child into the world. Had the baby survived? Mrs. Patterson hadn't mentioned a child. Rebecca felt a deep ache of sympathy for what Quinn must have endured. No wonder he worked himself to exhaustion. Grief was a heavy burden to carry alone. That evening, Rebecca ate supper in the hotel dining room. The food was simple but good: roast chicken, potatoes, and green beans. She listened to the conversations around her, getting a feel for the town. Grass Valley seemed to be a decent place, prosperous but not showy, with hard-working people who looked out for each other. She slept better that night than she had in weeks, despite the lumpy mattress. Maybe it was the relief of having a roof over her head, or maybe it was the anticipation of seeing Quinn again in the morning. She woke early, washed carefully in the basin, and put on her best dress, a blue cotton that brought out her eyes. She brushed her dark hair until it shone and pinned it up neatly. Looking at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, she saw a woman who had been through hard times but hadn't been broken by them. Her face was perhaps a bit thinner than it had been a year ago, but her eyes were clear and determined. At 8:30, she went downstairs with her carpetbag and waited in the lobby. Mrs. Patterson brought her a cup of coffee and a biscuit without being asked, waving away payment. "You look nervous, dear. Don't be. You're making a good choice." At precisely 9 o'clock, Quinn appeared in the doorway. He'd cleaned up since yesterday, wearing a fresh shirt and a black vest, his jaw cleanly shaved. He looked even more handsome than Rebecca remembered, and her heart did that little skip again. "Morning," he said, his eyes finding hers immediately. "Have you made a decision?" Rebecca stood, lifting her bag. "I have. I'd be honored to work for you, Mr. Owens." His face broke into a genuine smile that transformed his whole countenance. "Quinn, and I'm glad, real glad." He took her bag from her. "My wagon's outside. I figured you'd say yes." That confident assumption might have annoyed her if it hadn't been accompanied by such obvious pleasure. Rebecca said goodbye to Mrs. Patterson and followed Quinn outside. True to his word, he had a wagon hitched to two sturdy horses. He helped her up onto the seat, then climbed up beside her. The ride to the Circle O took about 40 minutes. They traveled through rolling hills dotted with oaks, past grazing cattle that wore Quinn's brand, and finally up to a house that sat in a small valley with a creek running through it. The house was larger than Rebecca had expected, a two-story structure made of wood with a wide porch wrapped around the front. It needed paint and some repairs, but the bones were good. Behind the house stood a barn, a bunkhouse, and several corrals. Cattle grazed on the surrounding hills and horses ran in one of the pastures. It was beautiful in a rugged, untamed way. A Mexican man emerged from the barn as they drove up. He was older, maybe 50, with a weathered face and kind eyes. Quinn waved to him. "That's Hector Martinez, best foreman in California. Hector, come meet Miss Rebecca Owens. She's going to be keeping house for us." Hector approached with a slight limp, removing his hat. "Welcome, Miss Owens. It's good to have a woman here again. These cowboys, they live like pigs." His English was accented but clear, and his smile was warm. "I'll do my best to civilize them," Rebecca said, liking him immediately. Quinn showed her around the property, pointing out the various buildings and explaining the workings of the ranch. He had about 300 head of cattle and a small but growing string of horses that he was starting to breed. Everything was well maintained despite the rough edges, showing that Quinn took pride in his work. Finally, he brought her inside the house. The front door opened into a large main room with a fireplace, a few pieces of sturdy furniture, and windows that let in good light. There was a dining table covered in papers and account books, a sofa that had seen better days, and a general air of neglect. It was clear no woman had lived here for a long time. "Kitchen's through here," Quinn said, leading her through a doorway. The kitchen was spacious with a good stove, a pump at the sink that drew from a well, and plenty of cabinet space. But dirty dishes were piled everywhere, and the whole room needed a thorough scrubbing. "Your room is here," Quinn continued, opening a door off the kitchen. The room was small but private, with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the creek. "There's a bathing room just outside your door. We had indoor plumbing put in 2 years ago. Well water, but it's good and clean." Rebecca set down her carpetbag and looked around. It was more than she'd hoped for. "It's perfect." Quinn stood in the doorway, suddenly looking uncertain. "I know the house is a mess. My wife, Sarah, she kept everything so nice. After she died, I just couldn't seem to make myself care about it, but that's no excuse for letting it get this bad." Rebecca turned to face him, seeing the grief still shadowing his eyes. "Mr. Owens, Quinn, I mean. I'm sorry for your loss. Mrs. Patterson told me what happened. I can't imagine how hard that must have been." He looked away, jaw tightening. 3 years and it still feels fresh sometimes. She was carrying our first child. I lost them both in one night. His voice was rough with pain. "The baby was a girl. We'd planned to name her Grace." Without thinking, Rebecca crossed to him and placed her hand on his arm. "I'm so sorry." Quinn looked down at her hand, then up at her face. "Thank you. Most people don't know what to say, so they say nothing, but you understand loss. I could tell yesterday when you talked about your parents. I do understand. The grief doesn't go away, does it? It just becomes something you carry." "No, it doesn't go away." He covered her hand with his own, the touch warm and solid. "But maybe it gets easier when you're not carrying it alone." They stood there for a moment, connected by shared sorrow and something else, something new and fragile. Then Quinn seemed to realize he was still holding her hand and stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should let you settle in. Take today to get yourself oriented. If you need anything from town, make a list and I'll fetch it tomorrow. Supper is usually around 6. I'll leave you to it." He left, and Rebecca could hear his boots on the wooden floor, then the front door closing. She sat on the bed and took a deep breath. What had she gotten herself into? This was supposed to be just a job, a way to survive. But the way her heart raced when Quinn looked at her suggested it was already becoming something more. She spent the rest of the day exploring the house and beginning to set it to rights. The place was bigger than it had first appeared, with 3 bedrooms upstairs in addition to the main room, kitchen, and her small room on the ground floor. One of the upstairs rooms had clearly been meant as a nursery, with a half-finished cradle in the corner and yellow curtains on the window. Rebecca's heart broke looking at it. She started with the kitchen, washing every dish and pot, scrubbing the counters and stove until they gleamed. She found basic supplies in the pantry: flour, beans, salt pork, some canned goods, enough to make a decent meal. At 6 o'clock, Quinn and Hector came in from the day's work, dusty and tired. They both stopped short when they saw the transformation in the kitchen. "Mary, Mother of God," Hector breathed, "is like magic." Quinn said nothing, just looked around with an expression Rebecca couldn't quite read. Then he looked at her and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Wonder maybe, or hope. "I made stew," she said, suddenly nervous. "It's not fancy, but it should be filling." They sat at the kitchen table, which she'd cleared and scrubbed. Rebecca ladled out stew into clean bowls and set out fresh biscuits she'd managed to make with the limited supplies. The men ate like they were starving, which they probably were after a full day's work. "Miss Rebecca," Hector said around a mouthful of biscuit, "you are angel sent from heaven. Is best meal I have in years." "It's just stew," Rebecca said, pleased despite herself. "It's wonderful," Quinn said quietly. "Thank you." Over the next few weeks, Rebecca settled into a routine. She rose early to make breakfast, spent her days cleaning and organizing the house, and had supper ready when the men came in from working the ranch. Slowly, the house began to look like a home again. She washed curtains and mended them, scrubbed floors until they shone, and organized Quinn's chaotic paperwork. In the evenings, after Hector had retired to the bunkhouse, Quinn would often sit with her at the kitchen table while she worked on mending or he went over the ranch accounts. They talked about everything and nothing: their childhoods, their dreams, the books they'd read. Rebecca learned that Quinn had a sharp mind and a dry sense of humor that made her laugh. Quinn discovered that Rebecca could calculate figures in her head faster than he could on paper, and she began helping him with the ranch bookkeeping. They were becoming friends, but there was an undercurrent to everything, a tension that made Rebecca's skin tingle when Quinn's hand brushed hers accidentally, or when she caught him watching her with an expression that was more than friendly. One evening about a month after she'd arrived, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Quinn had brought out 2 cups of coffee, and they sat in comfortable silence. "I need to tell you something," Quinn said finally. "I didn't hire you just because I needed a housekeeper." Rebecca's heart began to pound. "No, no. From the moment I saw you standing there on that road, you did something to me, made me feel alive again in a way I haven't since Sarah died. I told myself it was just loneliness, that I was being foolish. But this past month, having you here, talking with you every evening, it's made me realize something." He turned to look at her, his eyes intense in the fading light. "I'm falling in love with you, Rebecca. Maybe I have been since the moment I lifted you onto my horse." Rebecca couldn't breathe. She'd known her own feelings had been growing, deepening from attraction to something more profound, but she hadn't dared hope Quinn felt the same. "I know it's too soon," Quinn continued. "I know I should wait longer, be more proper about it, but I've learned that life is short and unpredictable. When you find something real, you hold on to it, And this, what I feel for you, it's real." "Quinn," Rebecca whispered, then found her voice. "I feel it too. I have almost from the beginning. I thought I was being foolish, that you couldn't possibly see me as anything more than an employee." He reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I see you as everything. You've brought light back into this house, into my life. I know I'm damaged goods, that I come with ghosts and grief. But if you'll have me, I'll spend the rest of my life making you happy." Rebecca felt tears on her cheeks. "You're not damaged goods. You're a good man who loved his wife and lost her. That doesn't make you broken, it makes you human. And yes, Quinn Owens, I'll have you. I'll have you with all my heart." He stood and pulled her up into his arms, holding her close. She could hear his heart pounding against her ear as fast as her own. Then he pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands and kiss her. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, a first kiss that felt like coming home. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling through tears. "Marry me," Quinn said. "Properly, with a church wedding and the whole town invited. Let me do this right." "Yes," Rebecca said. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were married 6 weeks later in the church in Grass Valley, with Mrs. Patterson weeping happy tears in the front pew and Hector standing as Quinn's best man. Rebecca wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her sew, and Quinn wore a new black suit that made him look devastatingly handsome. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Quinn kissed her with such tenderness that Rebecca felt her soul settle into place, like she'd been wandering lost and had finally found her way. The wedding supper was held at the hotel, with half the town attending. People danced and laughed, and Hector played guitar while someone else had brought a fiddle. Quinn held Rebecca in his arms as they swayed to the music, and she felt happiness bubble up inside her like a spring. "What are you thinking?" Quinn murmured against her hair. "That I'm glad the stage left without me that day. That the worst moment of my life led to the best. I think about that too. What if I'd ridden a different route that day? What if I'd come along 5 minutes earlier or later and missed you entirely? Makes me believe in fate." "Or providence," Rebecca said, thinking of the shared last name that had broken the ice between them, the 1,000 small coincidences that had led to this moment. That night, in the bedroom they now shared, Quinn made love to her with such reverence and care that Rebecca felt cherished in a way she'd never experienced. He was gentle because it was her first time, patient with her nervousness, and when pleasure finally overtook her, she cried out his name like a prayer. Afterward, they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his hand stroking her hair. "I need to tell you about Sarah," Quinn said quietly. Rebecca stiffened slightly. They'd avoided talking much about his first wife, and she hadn't wanted to push. "You don't have to. I want to. You deserve to know." He was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I loved Sarah. We grew up together, and marrying her felt as natural as breathing. She was my best friend. But what I feel for you, Rebecca, it's different, stronger somehow. Maybe because I'm not a boy anymore, maybe because I know how precious and fragile life is. I don't love you more than I loved her, but I love you differently. Does that make sense?" "It does," Rebecca said. "And I'm not threatened by her memory, Quinn. She was part of making you the man you are. I'm grateful for what you had, even though it ended in tragedy." He kissed the top of her head. "You're remarkable, you know that. So are you." Life settled into a new rhythm. Rebecca was no longer just the housekeeper, but the mistress of the Circle O, Quinn's partner in every sense. She took over the bookkeeping completely, discovering that Quinn had been undercharging for his cattle and negotiating better prices that increased their income significantly. She also started a vegetable garden and began raising chickens, making the ranch more self-sufficient. Quinn taught her to ride properly, not just clinging behind him on the horse. She took to it quickly, and soon they were riding out together to check on the herd or just to enjoy the beautiful California landscape. She loved those rides, loved the freedom of galloping across open ground with the wind in her hair and Quinn beside her. In the quiet moments, in bed at night or sitting on the porch watching the stars, they shared their dreams. Quinn wanted to expand the ranch, maybe start breeding horses more seriously. Rebecca wanted to start a lending library in Grass Valley, having discovered that books were hard to come by and expensive. They were building a future together, brick by brick, dream by dream. 8 months after their wedding, Rebecca realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week to be sure, then another, before she finally told Quinn. They were in the barn, checking on a mare about to foal when she said it. "Quinn, I think I'm with child." He froze, the curry comb in his hand hovering over the mare's back. When he turned to look at her, his face had gone white. "Are you sure?" "Fairly sure. I'm nearly 2 months late and I've been feeling sick in the mornings." Quinn set down the comb very carefully and came to her. "How do you feel about it?" Rebecca understood the question behind the question. He was afraid, terrified of losing another wife, another child. "I'm scared," she admitted. "But I'm also happy. I want this baby, Quinn. I want your child." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I can't lose you. I can't go through that again." "You won't," Rebecca said fiercely. "I'm strong and healthy. Women have babies every day and survive just fine. We'll get the best doctor, we'll be careful, but we will not live in fear." Over the next months, as her belly swelled, Quinn was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He didn't want her riding, didn't want her lifting anything heavier than a teacup, barely wanted her out of his sight. Rebecca tolerated it because she understood the fear driving it, but she also insisted on maintaining some normalcy. She couldn't spend 9 months as an invalid. Dr. Morrison from Grass Valley came out once a month to check on her. He was an older man with a reassuring manner who pronounced her perfectly healthy and the baby strong. "Your husband is worrying for nothing," he told Rebecca. "You're built for childbearing and everything is progressing normally." Still, as her due date approached in early spring of 1880, Quinn became increasingly anxious. Hector moved into the house temporarily, sleeping in one of the upstairs rooms, so Rebecca would never be alone if Quinn had to be out working. Mrs. Patterson came and stayed for 2 weeks before the baby was due, helping with the household tasks that had become difficult for Rebecca. The labor started on a warm April morning when wildflowers were blooming across the hills. Rebecca's waters broke while she was kneading bread, and the first contraction hit her like a fist. Mrs. Patterson sent Hector running for the doctor while she got Rebecca into bed. Quinn paced like a caged animal, his face gray with terror. "Go outside," Mrs. Patterson ordered him. "You're making everyone nervous. We'll call you when it's time." "I'm not leaving her," Quinn said flatly. Rebecca, between contractions, managed to say, "Let him stay. I want him here." So Quinn stayed, holding her hand, wiping her face with a cool cloth, whispering encouragement as the hours wore on. The labor was hard and long, but Rebecca was strong. When Dr. Morrison finally arrived, he examined her and pronounced everything normal. "Won't be much longer now," he said. "You're doing fine, Mrs. Owens." And he was right. 2 hours later, as the sun was setting, Rebecca gave one final push and felt the baby slide free. A moment of terrifying silence, then a thin wail filled the room. "A boy," Dr. Morrison announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A fine, healthy boy." Quinn was crying, tears streaming down his face as the doctor cleaned the baby and placed him in Rebecca's arms. She looked down at the tiny, red, perfect face and felt love so overwhelming she could barely breathe. "Our son," she whispered. "Our son," Quinn repeated, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. The infant's fingers closed around Quinn's, gripping tight, and Quinn let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "He's perfect. You're perfect. Thank you, Rebecca, thank you." They named him Thomas James Owens, after both their fathers. Tommy, they called him, and he was the light of their lives. Quinn, who had been so afraid, became a devoted father, tending to the baby at night so Rebecca could sleep, carrying him around the ranch wrapped in a sling against his chest, singing off key lullabies that made Rebecca laugh. The fear that had gripped Quinn throughout the pregnancy melted away, replaced by joy. He watched Rebecca nurse their son with wonder in his eyes, and he told her at least once a day how much he loved her. Tommy grew from infant to toddler, a sturdy boy with his father's gray-green eyes and his mother's dark hair. He took his first steps on the front porch, lunging from Rebecca's arms to Quinn's, and they both cheered like he'd done something miraculous. He spoke his first word at 10 months, "Papa," which made Quinn walk around grinning for days until Tommy's second word was "Mama," which evened things out. When Tommy was 2 years old, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant again. This time, Quinn didn't panic. He'd learned that Rebecca was strong, that their love could weather storms. The second pregnancy was easier than the first, and their daughter was born on a snowy December day. They named her Grace Sarah Owens, honoring the daughter and wife Quinn had lost. It felt right, like completing a circle. Grace was quieter than her brother, a thoughtful baby who watched everything with solemn blue eyes. Tommy adored her, bringing her his toys and patting her head with his chubby toddler hands. The house rang with laughter and life, all the empty spaces filled. 2 years later came another son, Matthew, and then 3 years after that, a second daughter they named Clara. The Circle O Ranch prospered along with the family. Quinn and Rebecca added more land, built a bigger barn, and increased their herd. Rebecca's lending library became a reality, operating out of a small building in town that Quinn helped her purchase. She stocked it with books ordered from San Francisco, and it became a gathering place for the community. The years rolled by in a blur of happiness. Tommy grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch and wanted to be exactly like his father. Grace discovered a talent for drawing and covered every scrap of paper she could find with pictures of horses and cattle. Matthew was the wild one, always climbing something or getting into mischief. Clara was the baby, spoiled by everyone but somehow remaining sweet-natured. Quinn and Rebecca grew older together, their hair gaining threads of silver, their faces weathering under the California sun. But their love never dimmed. Every evening, no matter how busy the day had been, they found time to sit together on the porch, holding hands and watching the sunset. "Do you ever think about that day?" Rebecca asked one evening when they were in their 40s and the children were all in bed. "The day the stage left without me." "All the time," Quinn said. "Best day of my life, even though you probably didn't think so at the time. I thought my life was ending. Turns out it was just beginning." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Quinn Owens, more every day." "I love you too, Rebecca. You saved me, you know. I was just going through the motions before you came. You taught me how to live again." "We saved each other," Rebecca corrected. Their children grew up and started making their own lives. Tommy took over more of the ranch work, becoming Quinn's right hand. Grace married a teacher from Sacramento and moved to the city, though she visited often. Matthew decided he wanted to be a doctor and went east to study. Clara, the baby, showed signs of being as business-minded as her mother, already talking about expanding the lending library into a full bookstore. Quinn and Rebecca became grandparents, then grandparents many times over. The house was often full of grandchildren running and playing, just as it had once been full of their own children. They watched the circle pass to the next generation, knowing their legacy was secure. On their 30th anniversary, Quinn took Rebecca back to the crossroads where they'd first met. They were older now, both in their 50s, but they rode out on horses just like that first day. Someone had put up a sign since then, marking the distances to various towns. The road was busier now with more traffic. "Right here," Quinn said, reining in his horse. "This is where I first saw you." Rebecca smiled, remembering the desperation and fear she'd felt and the relief when Quinn had appeared like an answer to a prayer. "Best wrong turn I ever took." "No such thing as a wrong turn if it leads you to the right place." Quinn dismounted and helped Rebecca down. He pulled her into his arms, right there in the middle of the road, and kissed her like they were young again. A wagon came rattling up and had to go around them, the driver laughing and calling out, "Get a room, you two." They laughed, not caring, holding on to each other in the place where their story had begun. Years later, when Rebecca was 68 and Quinn was 72, they sat on their porch on a warm summer evening. Their children were grown and gone, living their own lives, but they visited often. The grandchildren, now some of them with children of their own, still came to the circle for holidays and summer vacations. The ranch was thriving under Tommy's management, modernizing while keeping the values Quinn had instilled. Rebecca's lending library had indeed become a bookstore, run by Clara, who had a talent for business that had made it one of the most successful shops in Grass Valley. Grace's artwork hung in galleries in San Francisco. Matthew had become a respected physician, known for his compassionate care. Quinn and Rebecca had built something lasting, not just in land and cattle, but in the lives they'd touched and the family they'd raised. "No regrets?" Quinn asked, as he'd asked her 100 times over the years. "Not a single one," Rebecca answered, as she always did. "You? Only that I didn't find you sooner. Think of all the years we missed." "We got the years we were meant to have, and they've been wonderful." Quinn squeezed her hand. His grip was weaker than it used to be, his hands gnarled with arthritis, but his love was as strong as ever. "You know what I think about sometimes? What would have happened if I'd ridden a different way that day, if I'd missed you entirely? You'd have walked to town, found some other job, lived a completely different life. But you didn't ride a different way. You were exactly where you were supposed to be, exactly when you were supposed to be there. We were meant to find each other, Quinn. I've always believed that. So do I." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were the same eyes that had captured her heart 35 years ago, full of love and wonder. "I'd do it all again in a heartbeat, every single moment." "So would I, even the hard parts, because they led to the good parts." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and purple. The ranch spread out around them, land they'd worked together, a home they'd built together, a life they'd created from nothing but chance and love and determination. Inside the house, they could hear their great-grandchildren playing, visiting for the summer. Tomorrow there would be work to do, family to tend to, a life to be lived. But for now, there was just this perfect moment. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful together, sitting hand in hand as the day faded into night. Quinn lifted Rebecca's hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely cowboy. Thank you for stopping when you saw a stranded woman on the road. Thank you for every day since." The stars began to appear, one by one, like diamonds scattered across velvet. Rebecca leaned her head on Quinn's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her, holding her close. Their story had started with her being left behind, with having nothing and nowhere to go. But Quinn had appeared, had offered her not just a ride but a future, and she'd been brave enough to take it. They'd faced grief and fear, had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical. They'd lost people they loved and welcomed new life. They'd worked hard, laughed often, and loved deeply. And through it all, they'd had each other. As the last light faded from the sky and the ranch settled into peaceful darkness, Rebecca thought about all the stages that left without her, all the chances she'd missed, all the doors that had closed. Every rejection, every disappointment, every moment of despair had led her to this. A life richer than she'd ever imagined, a love deeper than she'd thought possible, a family that spread out like roots from a strong tree. The stage had left without her, but Quinn had put her on his horse and ridden west, toward the sunset, toward home, toward forever. And that, Rebecca thought as sleep began to claim her there on the porch in her husband's arms, had made all the difference.